We are back, and as you know, this month, in the month of Ramadan, we are discussing the history, theology, philosophy, politics, and many other facets of Islam. And before I move on to the philosophical aspect of it, which I'll do in the next episode, let me just finish with the points on certain socio-political aspects of Islam which come into the modern discussions quite a number of times. And these are the topics that really divide Muslims and non-Muslims, and also other people who are probably not looking at this debate through a religious lens, but let's say through a philosophical or moral lens. So I'm going to talk about these controversial issues, and the idea would be to build bridges, to understand the 2 points of views and see how we can move forward. We don't want to get stuck at one point where we are adamant on our own views, but rather the idea is to live in harmony with each other. So let's talk about these controversial issues. First of all, the question about women's rights, feminism. And the point that often comes is Islam doesn't give enough rights to women, and women are subjugated in the Islamic societies. And the discussion related to their morality, their dressing, which includes burqa, hijab, these things, questions related to their character, all those things, they somehow don't go together with the Western ideas of freedom. So first of all, when we make that point, we have to understand that does every value system, does it always have to coincide or match with the standards of the Western liberalism? I think that's where we should begin our discussion. Because if we are starting our discussion from that lens, from the Western liberal lens, where freedom is the ultimate thing, it's the ultimate ideal, then obviously you're going to have troubles discussing societies and value systems which don't really hold freedom as the highest ideal. And keeping that in mind, I think we should begin to understand what does the religion say on women, what are their rights, how they are treated, how they are supposed to be treated, right? So when we take a look at the primary text, which is the Quran and the Hadith, we find that the dignity of women, it matters. And that is the theological aspect of it. You can't really deny that. You'll find this across spectrum in the Muslim societies, whether in the East or the West or in the Arab world. You'll find that. What we also need to see is, does it focus on the dignity of men? And certainly it does. So we are talking about a value system which focuses on respect, dignity, honor. These are the values we're talking about. And by the way, when we look at a lot of Eastern cultures, you'll find that these are the kind of values that remain central to them. It's not always freedom. Freedom is probably more of a Western thing. But when you come to these different Eastern societies, you'll find that not freedom, but respect, honor, culture, they become their ideal. Another thing that we should focus on, And where I think the feminism debate gets interesting is, should we treat women equally or fairly? And you will see there again, even among the liberals, the opinion is getting divided. Some people say that you should treat women absolutely equally as you treat men, absolute equal standards. But then some might say, and they do say, that it's not really possible. Menstrual leaves, for example, are meant for women, so you have to be fair to women. You don't have to measure them against men, but you have to consider them. You need to include them, whether in the workforce or any sphere, political, social sphere of life. So, when we talk about Islam as a religion, I think when we read the primary text, we get the sense that it is talking about the latter part, about treating women fairly and working on their dignity, not treating them in the very absolute sense equally. So there are different, of course, different standards, different requirements expected from men than women. And that's just the plain truth. You can't run away from that. And as I said, that is just another value system. So as I was saying, this fundamental ideal, that really matters when we're talking about an idea like feminism. So Western feminism, because the Western value is choosing the ideal as freedom, it would focus on women being free, women being liberated, sexually liberated, morally liberated, politically liberated. So liberation, that will be the ultimate goal for them. But when you talk about Islamic cultures where the dignity of a woman, that matters, freedom might not be the first thing that'll come to them. So they would be very much repelled by this new notion of freedom where you turn women into commodities, where you just throw away your dignity and embrace this freedom. That's just not what they're seeking. And that's something I think people need to understand, that these two different value systems, they are aspiring for different things. Then the next question arrives, if these are two different value systems, how these two different value systems are going to coexist. For example, in the Western countries, if there is, and there already is, a lot of movement of people from the Muslim countries to the Western societies, and these two value systems are naturally going to give rise to different legal aspects of it, of the society, then how the two are going to coexist. And that's really the challenge. That is the challenge that currently Europe is facing, and probably many other countries in the North American continent would face in future. But that's the debate that intellectuals and politicians need to have, how you're going to bring different value systems, sometimes which may not be compatible, how you're going to bring them together and coexist in peace and harmony. The next one that I'm going to talk about is the question of apostasy. That is, what happens when somebody leaves the religion. And that's a really difficult one. Because when we look around in most of the Muslim societies, leaving your religion, becoming ex-Muslim, is a crime punishable by death. And that's a serious problem. And perhaps that's the reason you find so many ex-Muslim movements around the world today. Now, how do we deal with this question in the light of the primary sources as well as the theology and philosophy of Islam? How do we move forward from here? I think the first step has to be the recognition of the problem. The recognition, the fact that it exists in Hadith. It's clearly written in one of the verses that you're supposed to kill that person. the fact that it is widely practiced in Sharia in so many Muslim countries today. So that clearly is a problem. Secondly, if we have to live together in peace with other people, we have to recognize that this cannot go on. It can, hypothetically, it can happen, it can continue this practice if you're living in an isolated country, with other people of different religions, modern values are not there. If you're living in that kind of society, then sure. And people do live in those countries. But this cannot be the way forward. Because if your ultimate value through religion, through morality, if the value is to help different people, is to benefit them, I don't see any reason of this justification that you can kill a person just because they are leaving the faith. That means you're imposing the faith on that individual, which goes against the very value of the religion. And if you're imposing the faith by sword and just asking somebody to believe when they don't believe, that's not just unfair, that's barbaric, that's horrible. But as I said, this is really a controversial one, and this is the discussion that needs to take place widely in the Muslim community. Because most of the scholars, and for example, Maulana Maududi was a prominent scholar, he believed that the death sentence for apostasy is absolutely right. It goes according to the prescriptions of the religion. Now, you cannot have that belief system and coexistence with people of different beliefs. You cannot have that. So I think there's a serious need of debates and discussions of how to interpret the religion, how to interpret religion on these minute aspects, and coming up with a clear plan so that everybody agrees, okay, this is the way forward. This is how we can live peacefully with others. Otherwise, people are going to be frightened of the religion and every Muslim, which probably is the case right now. A similar question is regarding the fatwas, where some cleric makes a pronouncement. It's more like a legal order, except that it doesn't come from a state institution, it comes from the religious establishments. That's really been problematic, because you cannot have these two different systems. For example, you have a state where authorities decide what's going to happen, who is the criminal, who is not, who you're supposed to catch and put in the jail, who is not supposed to go in the jail. You cannot have these two parallel systems. And this comes originally from the early history of Islam, when there were many tribal institutions, but there wasn't a modern state per se. And there you had this tradition of fatwas, where the clerics gave a call, whether it was for violence or for some other reason, and then they had to do that. But this again is a problem in a modern state. It's perfectly fine in most of the Muslim countries, because there you can have this, most of these Muslim countries are, they have state religion as Islam. So if the state is giving a call or making an announcement that is coming from the state, that's pretty much the same as it would come from the religious clerics. But it doesn't work in other countries, in other secular countries. That's really giving the religion a bad name, because then you're kind of going against the state in which you're living. And probably you're living as a minority, and despite being a minority, you're creating troubles there. So there again, I think there has to be a clear question about fatwas. What would be their role? Who has the authority to give fatwas, and there has to be some clarity over that. Otherwise, once again, the community is going to be isolated from the rest of the society. And that's something, again, has been going on in many societies. And as far as I think it's the central point in all these issues that I'm talking about. It's probably about the legal aspects of it. And especially in a country like India, where I live, I've seen this challenge quite a lot, because for the Muslim community, you have the Muslim Personal Board, and they follow in a lot of matters. You find Sharia being applied when it comes to the personal laws, and that seems slightly tricky. For example, for women of other religions, the minimum age to get married is 18 years. And for Muslim women, it's 16 years. And you can't change that, because then the Muslims would get offended. A similar problem was with the idea of triple talaq, where if the Muslim man, he said the word talaq thrice, he would get divorced from his wife. And that was really the ancient practice that was going on. It has now been eliminated, but that's just an example of what can happen, because the girl in that case might think that I'm not being treated fairly as per the laws of this country. And just because I'm a Muslim girl, they're marrying me at the age of 17, whereas girls from other religion, they are not getting married under the pressure. That would be considered criminal. Then why apply different standards for Muslims, and which, by the way, Muslims themselves want, at least a majority of them? But then, in that case, what about the minority of Muslims who might want certain progressive values for themselves? And once again, as I was saying earlier, the question comes of how to reconcile the two, especially if you're a Muslim and living in a secular country. How are you going to go about it? Should you be treated as a Muslim and given special privileges that are there to protect Muslim values? Or should you be treated as an equal citizen and get all the rights and privileges that other citizens of the country, whether from this religion or that, they are getting? So I think that again is a very serious question. And that again goes back to the Muslim community. They, among themselves, first need to settle this question. What do they want? If you want Sharia for Muslims, everybody, what about those Muslims who don't want Sharia for themselves? How are you going to treat them? Do you want them to leave the religion? Are they supposed to leave the religion? So these kind of difficult questions we need to settle. And I know it's easier said than done, and it's not even about one person, two people, one family, or a group of individuals discussing these questions. But my point is, at some point there has to be some kind of consensus on these issues. Some kind of discussion needs to take place among the masses, especially in media, in popular forums, in politics. This needs to be discussed, because unless we settle these questions, two things cannot happen. One, Muslims and non-Muslims, they cannot live in peace and harmony. Two, the Muslim community itself cannot move forward, because the rest of the communities, they are progressing, they are making huge progress in different spheres, but a lot of Muslims are getting stuck because of their own interpretations and certain practices which they don't want to live with, and which might not be the might not go along with the central values of Islam. So, unless we have the answers, unless we settle these questions, it's going to be a difficult ride for the Muslim community. So, with that, I'll finish today's episode, and tomorrow onwards, we'll discuss the Islamic philosophy. So, stay with me.